Hello everyone, this is Frank DeFreitas and welcome to HoloTalk, the Internet's laser and holography talk show, enjoyed in over 42 countries throughout the world. And now, here's this week's show. Len, it's Frank DeFreitas.
Oh my God, I missed your voice, Frank. Forgive me.
That's okay.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fine, you know. For an old guy, I'm doing fine. It's really good. You know, Frank, whenever I miss you, I go to your website and I read all kinds of incredible stuff. I mean, you're so brilliant. You really are, Frank.
All right, we can stop that now.
No, I'm serious. I really do that. It's comforting because the other day I was thinking about laser diode lasers, and your stuff is still out. You're still doing holograms, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have someone coming in tomorrow, coming up from Florida for a workshop. They're visiting relatives in Philadelphia, so they're going to drive up to Allentown for a workshop tomorrow.
Did you ever consider, these are some of the questions I had in my head, did you ever consider using a polymer plate? I don't know if you can buy the resin from DuPont, whether they sell it to the public or they just keep it in-house.
No, I wouldn't have the power or the wavelength right now to do that, I don't believe. I do have an argon laser here now.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you build it or make it?
I got it from someone else, and I still have to get it hooked up because it needs the 220 triple phase and like 2.5 gallons of water a minute.
Oh, my God.
So I don't want to knock the neighborhood out, you know.
It's a power failure in the wintertime, and it's not snow, it's Frank DeFreitas.
Hey, listen.
You know, I miss making holograms so much. But the only thing that's kept me going, especially when I got some of my sight back, I saw you after I got my sight back, didn't I?
It's been a couple years. It might have been 2001, 2002, but that's a long time.
Right, and it's just appropriate that you call now because all of a sudden I realized there's something wrong with my sight. You know the lens implants that they put in?
Yeah.
Well, the one eye I'm using, the lens implant seems to have torn loose internally, and they're going to have to take it out and put another one in. I'm going in for surgery on the 2nd of November.
Oh, I hope everything works out all right for you.
I'm nervous because in an implant, after it's uncurled, it's got springs on it to hold it in place. So, hey, it's one thing to have one operation, but this is two. First, you got to demolish the building, then put another one up. So, it's the anesthesia, I guess, I should be worried about. You know, as you get older.
How old are you now?
I'm 72, Frank.
No kidding. Why don't you tell the listeners how you got started with holography? That was way back in the 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't you travel up to Canada or something?
Yeah. Well, what happened? I had read about. I read somewhere. First of all, I read details about holography in the current magazines like Scientific American things. Photography by laser, I think there was a big article. But when I realized that the 67 Expo advertised that they had a hologram on display, or several holograms, I just decided to go. I think it was early or late September because it was cold on the road, and I just drove straight to Canada from work. I left work one day, walked out of school, got in the car, and long ride up to, let me see, it was held in, was it Montreal? Yeah. At some point I was doing 90 miles an hour on this open highway that had opened up. But when I got there, I found out that everything was on strike, all the public transportation. And it was cold. I mean, it really wasn't what I expected, but I went late at night, and I ran over to the booth where the map said the hologram was, and the lights were out.
Oh, no.
And I couldn't see anything. There was nothing to see because the hologram was on display like in an outdoor kiosk.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were in an indoor building, but I still had a great time. I had my 3D camera with me, and after many, many hours, I even went through the, there are a lot of mythical things. I went through the labyrinth, and I saw the Minotaur. As a matter of fact, I took 3D pictures of him because I carried a tripod, the sculpture.
Oh, okay.
And I was doing time exposures. You know, I'm talking about minutes and counting and covering it with a hat I bought. because I didn't want to touch the camera or lens, came out razor sharp in 3D. And
you did a lot of 3D work, didn't you, with photography too?
You know, recently in the last few years, I was able to buy a scanner, and one of the reasons I want my computer is really down. The Dell seems to have died. I don't hear the hard drive running. I need a new computer.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that I wanted that, I figured if I could put the both sides, both stereo images, in the computer, I could reformat them as an anaglyph, and I did. I started experimenting with that.
Okay.
And that way, just anybody with a red and blue pair of paper glasses could see the things I had done in 3D, including my grandkids.
Oh, and you were going to put them on a web page, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Do you have that web page finished?
No. You know what? All of us didn't get done. The computer's busted. The scanner's sitting here. The printer doesn't work. I need one of everything. But you know what? In the last few years, I have been in and out of the hospital. It's crazy. And now with this vision thing, which is the last thing I envisioned, I'm just struggling to stay afloat, Frank. Because it's hard without help. You know, living alone, you've always lived with somebody.
Yeah.
And you're surrounded by, I guess, some friends or family. It's really hard when you... I'm
surrounded by my own multiple personalities.
No, you're a resourceful dude. I remember you pulling up on your motorcycle.
Yeah.
I remember you coming down for my mother's funeral.
Yeah.
I mean, you always get around where you want to get, Frank. I really, you're fabulous. How old are you now, Frank?
Me? I just turned 50.
Oh, my God. You're just a baby cake.
Just a baby cake. Hold on a second.
Go ahead.
That's the weather alert.
Was it going to tell you sunshine's coming out?
Yes, sun's coming out.
I miss being in the basement of the Franklin Institute.
Yeah, why don't you tell listeners about your involvement with the Franklin Institute and Central High School, too?
Well, I had gone to Central as a young kid and wasn't doing well, and I transferred out and eventually graduated from Northeast, so it was strange to get back to Central, but... and I'll show you what age does for you. What was the original question?
That's all right.
All right, I was reading
about
an article.
The Franklin Institute holography program.
Yeah, I was reading an article. I think it was in the Inquirer, and they pointed out that the Franklin Institute had gotten a grant, and they were going to offer holography classes. Blah blah blah.
And what year was this?
I'm guessing it had to be between, it had to be 76, 77.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere in there. And so I called up, and I think I spoke to Dan Goldwater, was the head of the science curriculum office down there. He was very nice. And Charles Penniman, who was a minister, he was also involved. And they told me that there were workshops. And I don't remember Scott's last name. Do you remember?
Nemtsow.
Yeah. And I realized eventually I realized in getting to know him, he was a very nice fellow, Scott. In getting to know Scott Nemtsow, I realized his father was a big shot, a vice president of a major corporation.
Yeah, Borden Foods, I think.
Exactly. And it was through Scott's father that the grant money was, parceled out. And that's why Scott had a place to go. I think Scott went to Brown University originally.
Yeah, he worked with Harriet Kasdan Silver up there, I believe.
Oh, yeah, okay. And he was very nice. He was kind of protective. You know, if you're a major, if you have a craft, you kind of want to protect it, like the original labor unions. Because if everybody can do it, you lose your speciality. And I realized that, too, because at the time that I discovered the holography workshops, I was helping start up the gifted program in the city of Philadelphia in all the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fascinated. I couldn't wait when they called me and told me that I could participate in the program. I used to rush down there. And Scott used to do little demos and show you how to make a hologram. But basically, by volunteering to spend time in the labs, you really learned by trial and error how to make a hologram.
Well, that was a pretty good lab down there too, wasn't it?
It was marvelous because it had I think it was a 9x12. Yeah, it had to be a 9x12 isolation table that came from what's that big company, Newport in California, and most of the equipment on the table. There was a large laser. It wasn't a new one, but Penniman had rebuilt it, if I remember. I think it was 50 milliwatts. Yeah,
it was at Spectraphysics 125.
Right. The special room was set aside. You could lose your hologram in a minute because people would run up and down the stairwell next to the lab. But I loved being in there, and eventually I figured out pretty much on my own how to make a transmission hologram, and that became... I mean, I used to leave work, which is school, on a Friday, and you could book I think a 3 or 4 hour amount of time in the lab where you could work, and other people could book, so, you had to move along. But I became friendly, believe it or not, because the Institute closed up at 5 o'clock. There was a guard, and they used to hire guards from a service. And I became very friendly with this one guard, and he would just let me in, and he'd let me wait or sit or whatever. I used to live in the lab all weekend because very few people, the novelty wore off, and very few people really took advantage of all the time you could spend in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it fascinating. And the first time that I made a magical and high-quality 4x5 hologram, it was just, I was dancing and there was nobody to watch. It was superb. So sometimes I used to be in there all weekend because I'd wait if nobody showed up. The guard, I remember his first name was Henry. He was marvelous, and instead of going home, I would stay. Eventually, I even used to date out of the Franklin Institute.
No.
Because I had other interests besides, and I found out he would let the other person in, and it's strange to be in a building all by yourself. It was just Henry and myself in the whole institute.
So are you saying you would take your date to the Franklin Institute down to the holography lab?
She'd come to the door, and Henry would say he's down in the lab, and he'd call down, and I'd say, it's okay, you can let her down. And and I can prove it. One of the women is still alive. We used to there was a photo booth there. A Polaroid photo booth when they first became popular.
Yeah.
You put $1 in and you take photos. But it was superb. And eventually, out of all this chaos, the gifted program was going nowhere. And one day when they had a show, and I was the science person in the gifted program, I had an idea that I could take some of the money that was being unused when they were going to close up the lab. And Charles Penniman helped me write a letter, and we paid Newport to keep the lab open. And I put out a notice in all the Philadelphia schools that anybody that was interested in coming to the lab, they'd have to come on their own. I couldn't provide transportation. That was the big rub. People were afraid to send their kids in Center City.
Oh, I see.
By themselves. They're only kids.
Yeah.
But eventually they started coming, and we had a lab, and the kids made holograms, and it never received any recognition like they did up in Boston or anywhere else. Because Philadelphia is a strange town. They knew I was doing holograms.
Yeah.
And some of the parents were wonderful. One of the parents of a girl, she was a brilliant mathematician. While she was in high school and I was at Girls, we were sending her to Penn for advanced math. And she used to explain some of the math that I couldn't understand. But she had to leave the program because one of the teachers told her mother she could go blind working in a lab with lasers.
Oh, no.
You run into unbelievable problems. But her dad was the one, he was a lawyer. He wrote the release that I sent out to all the kids that their parents agreed that they could come to the lab. And I was very careful to make sure no one ever got hurt. It was really safety. Being a teacher and watching kids was good training because I had maybe 10, 15 kids in the lab with which is a lot. First of all, you don't want any body movement. That was the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
But one interesting thing happened. Scott Nemzov was going to take off on vacation one summer, and he was teaching a class of adults, and there was nobody to teach it. And I said to Charlie Penniman, I would be glad to teach it if you allow me. I don't have his expertise. And I ended up teaching that class, and one of the members of the board of directors of the Franklin Institute was in that class, or two of them. So that was a big thrill, being able to make holograms and working with adults. It was just a marvelous time. I mean, some people want to go to Paris and some people want to go to Russia. I just wanted to get to the lab and work on that isolation table. It was fabulous.
Yeah, they were years before I got involved. I saw my first show down at the Walnut Street Theater in '76.
Right. And I still have the flyer from that show.
Do you have that? Yeah, I had a poster, and I have no idea what I did with the poster.
I'm pretty sure I have that flyer.
Yeah. And what about, was Ken Dunkley and Doug Miller involved with that at all?
Yeah, Doug Miller came on later. I think he entered one of the workshops, because they ran different workshops depending on the funding they got. Ken Dunkley had already been a holographer. He was tied in with the Franklin Institute. I still remember that. Remember that face he did with the sand?
Oh, yeah, it's classic.
That's a classic hologram. And he would give lectures to the rest of us about that. I mean, he was brilliant. And I remember the tricolor holograms when they first started showing them, when they were swelling things with triethanolamine.
Oh, yeah, I love doing that.
You became an expert at that.
Well, I wouldn't say an expert, but I enjoyed doing it.
Oh, absolutely. If you want a toxicity, just see Frank. He'll supply it. I'm very lucky with all the chemicals, because we all get sloppy. We have our hands in all the chemistry.
Oh, yeah.
As a kid, my father was a watchmaker, and he sent me to cleaning clocks. I was immersed in benzene, which is a carcinogenic hydrocarbon by today's standards. I'm just amazed that I'm still here.
Well, in the early days, I used the mercuric chloride bleach and the parabenzoquinone, and even the bromine.
Oh, well, that's violent.
Which, violent. Had to clear the house out one time with it.
I once remember in college, we used to manufacture bromine in the chem lab, and it was in the summertime, and we were cooling the condensate with test tubes packed in ice. And one of the test tubes fell and broke, and it was brutal. We had eye injuries and everything else. So these things that we work with are pretty toxic.
Yeah, it's gotten a little bit better.
But I really never had a chance to finish in the labs. They closed the labs down, and I kept working. I kept teaching holography, as you remember, at the Franklin Institute as a small workshop, and even at Widener College. But when plates became, and I built the table here in the living room, but as plates became difficult, my vision deteriorated, everything became, less accessible.
Yeah.
And it slowly faded away. And I had I used to interview the kids in the gifted program. Most teachers would ask them, their backgrounds. I would ask, what's your father do, what's your grandfather do? And they got to know it. I could hear the kids mumbling in the background. They would say, listen to what he's going to ask them. I was looking for a machinist.
Oh, okay.
And I found one.
Oh, okay.
And he helped me formulate all those parts that you saw out of scrap metals.
Do you still have those?
I still have those. And that's why I was thinking of building a laser diode. And because I still have a laser, I think it'll fire up, or I would buy him a diode laser and supervise him, because, that's how much I love the holograms.
Well, I'll tell you what, next time I'm down in Philadelphia, I'll stop by and I'll bring one of the shoebox holography books, a box of plates, and one of the small laser pointers for him to work with. How's that?
Oh, that's fabulous, Frank.
I'll bring it down. I know where you're at. You're still at, I won't give the street address, but the number's still 7227, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not going to broadcast this silly conversation, are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to edit it down a little bit.
It has nothing of value in it, right?
Well, it's got some history to it. I mean, a lot of the people that will be listening to this show, many of them weren't even born when you're talking about some of the things that you did.
Well, they can't
in the
realize
60s.
that I would spend hours with a pencil and a piece of paper just trying to draw what scientific instruments and plate holders and pointers and so forth. Remember we used to move the pinholes, the XY axis?
Oh, yeah.
So that if I could get a hold of Clarence and he had time in his shop, he would take scraps of metal and work with them and then bring me what he had made and said, will this work? And we said, well, let's rework it this way. And that's where all the equipment came from that you saw eventually.
Yeah.
I was really very fascinated that he would help me do that. And at Central High School, I finally was able to clean out a roach-infested room. It took me months. I mean, it's a horrible experience to think about. I'm not kidding about the roaches.
Oh, goodness.
And as soon as I got it cleaned out and was able to start building a table in there because I wanted to do holography with the kids, they confiscated it for music storage instruments.
Oh, I see.
For the band.
Okay.
So holography never got going at Central.
Isn't that something?
Well, that's because, the administration didn't think it had any value.
Yeah. And it was probably, I don't know. A lot of it's politics and funding and things of that nature.
Well, I didn't ask them for anything. See, I was supplying all the funding and all the equipment.
Okay.
All I needed was a physical space in the basement.
But it probably wasn't making them any money. They probably found some way of having the band make money.
Well, I wasn't a favorite on the list.
Yeah.
And the band,
well, that's the politics part.
Yeah, a lot depends. The other principal, I was at a school. Remember I said all the junior high school kids came from all over the city?
Yeah.
That principal let me not come in that day, but report to the Franklin Institute. Said I was in his, I call in that I'm in the building. And Charles Penniman and Dan Goldwater, they were marvelous. They used to wonder, why aren't you here teaching science? Because the other teachers would bring classes in, and they do little trivial experiments like batteries and bulbs, things the teachers could do in their classroom.
Yeah.
But education hasn't changed much. I keep hearing about how things are going to get better in education. They're probably worse than when I started, because first of all, it takes a family to bring a kid to school and say, sit here and learn. And I used to end up screaming at my kids because it didn't matter after many years of teaching whether I gave a test on any given day. I would give any kid any test he wanted, any day he wanted. That's a system nobody uses because it's impossible. It takes forever. And then I had retests. You could if learning the material is important, just let the kid learn in his own time.
Yeah.
And I remember screaming, do you want to work at a Burger King or do you want to own one?
There you go.
They should have... Frank?
Do you have a call coming in?
Yeah, hold on a second. Just 1 second.
All right, well, say goodbye to the listeners.
Listen, I'm very honored to be able to speak to my old friend Frank.
All right.
I really mean that. It's been a terrific treat, and Frank, I'm looking forward to seeing you and talking about lots of things. Listen, Frank, when you come down, could you bring one of your three-dimensional portrait holograms?
Oh, the little mini portraits. Yeah, I'll bring it down.
I would love to see one while I can.
All right.
Thanks, Frank.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
What a treat talking to you. Thanks, Frank.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.